order to reach their conclusions. How here the Commission can reach a conclusion that there is a pollution in given the situation of an opinion. The final results of these evaluations are just opinions by institutions with the weight of these institutions. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question. Please, Fotis, come here.
On the
because the professor cannot see you.
It's a question to Mr.
Okay, please. He's here.
Hi. I'd like to address the question to the first speaker. My question is kind of similar, but not the same. So I'd like to ask, how can we talk about collision when the Big Three, or any CRA for that matter, actually does use, let's say, those economic objective numbers, and also the fact that the ratings they make are similar might even suggest that they work correctly and not, let's say, in accordance with each other, or even a tacit collusion is inferred. I mean, okay, it can make sense either way. That's what I'm trying to suggest, and it's practically what you said. You can't prove it, but how can we use the whistleblower in that matter when the economic numbers are objective? That's what I would like, if you can detail it.
I would like to ask two questions to Professor Gortsos, and we were very happy to have this regulation of 2009 about credit rating agencies. The problem is that Moody's and Standard & Poor's control 90% of the global market. How much of the European market they control, what is the position in their market, and whether they have subsidiaries in Europe, since their main headquarters are in the United States. So do they have created subsidiaries in Europe in order to be under the control of the regulation and of ESMA and national authorities? And the second is more difficult and more complex, the second question. My second question is about systematic internalizers. I mean Goldman Sachs, I mean Deutsche Bank, Danske Bank, and so on. Do they have any thing to do with credit rating agencies? Systematic internalizers are very few in the capital markets of the European Union, and they are very, very strong, like Goldman Sachs, for example. Goldman Sachs is also a company which sells and buys Greek bonds, for example, under the authorization given by the Bank of Greece or a Greek authority to do so. So, do we have anything to say about this connection between systematic internalizers of sovereign bonds and multinational bonds and investment firms and credit rating agencies? That was my questions, my two questions. Are there any other questions here? Yes, Mr. Koutsiolas, would you like to add something?
Mr. Gortsos, I omitted something before.
Could you please open, switch?
What the European law says about the activities of those firms. I wonder if a rating is an exclusive business activity for those firms, or they participate in the market in other qualities too. So, the exclusivity.
Yeah. So, we start with Mr. Clough first. Please, yes, please.
Thank you for my two questions, which I think are more or less the same. If I understand, the question is if the CRAs are effectively giving an objective opinion based on economic statistics, as you put it. Well, there are a number of answers to this question. Let me start off with the one that doesn't agree with you. And that is, I didn't mention this, but in the literature, you will find there's evidence that when the CRAs adjust their ratings, they often put out feelers, as it's called. In other words, they put out advance notice that maybe the market's changing for this country, right? So that their competitors see that they may be thinking in that direction. Then they do the adjustment, and by extraordinary coincidence, seconds later, I exaggerate, but maybe the same day, the others change the rating. Now that could be tacit collusion. Let me give you some other examples from other financial services. Some of you will probably have to hear me say this again tomorrow. But in the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority fined RBS £30 million because RBS and Barclays employees were talking to each other in social events about what they were going to charge a syndicated loan. Now, why couldn't that happen in the CRA industry and we get a whistleblower? Exactly. Barclays whistle blew, no fine. RBS 30 million fine for idle whispers is what people call it. On the other hand, I entirely agree with the sentiment of your question. As I've already said, you've got to find the evidence. There's got to be some evidence of tacit collusion, and indeed all the other elements to prove the infringement. But I can't rule it out. Thank you.
Okay, now I give the floor to Professor Gortsos to answer the questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Pikiotas. How are you? I'm very glad that you're there. Let me start, Mr. Anagnostopoulou, from your last question, which you consider to be the difficult one. I think it's the easy one, because the systemic analyzers are not necessarily linked with the credit rating agencies, and correctly so. Let me explain why. The term systemic internalizer is defined in the MiFID, in the MiFID 2. And the MiFID 2 is the directive on markets in financial instruments, and the internal stabilizers are considered, the systematic internalizers are considered to be one of the so-called trading venues, and of the execution venues according to the MiFID. And there are specific rules. Execution venues meaning the places where orders can be executed and where bonds and stocks can be traded and derivative instruments can be traded. So the systematic internalizers are being regulated according to the MiFID 2. As a matter of fact, they are not involved themselves in the whatsoever issuing of instruments. They are mainly in the trading system. So, to that extent, I do not think that there is any link between the activity of credit rating agencies and systematic internalizers. Nevertheless, you correctly pointed out that their importance is very significant, and indeed, it is the MiFID 2 which contains very specific rules on the definition and the regulation and the supervision of systematic internalizers. Let me now conceptualize in terms of answering the other questions posed by yourself, Mr. Anagnostopoulou, and Mr. Mitsiolas. First of all, let us admit that the business of producing ratings is confined to very few institutions. There is an oligopolistic character in this market, and this makes sense because the investments that have to be made by a firm in order to produce reliable ratings are so huge that not only the startup cost, but also the maintenance of the business is very expensive. And it is obvious that if other players in our day could enter into the market and play a more significant role into this, they would have done so. There is no market barrier or legal barrier in that sense, but I understand that the cost of maintaining a reliable business is such that all the others, apart from the big three and the Chinese rating agency, which is credit rating, which is very important in that part of the world, are confined to local markets. And we have the English credit rating agency, correct? It's ICAP. And you have other rating agencies, but you correctly said that there is a concentration ratio of 90%. I think that for the big three, it's even worse, it's 95. So that means that the oligopolistic character of the market must be explained by the underlying business conditions. Again, another aspect which is relevant here is that credit rating agencies are mainly based on historical data. And we know that history is not always the best way to explain the future and foresee the future. We can use the very typical case of someone who gets a loan from a bank with 1,000 euros and then he repays the debt and he is eligible for 10,000 euros and he repays his debt and then 100,000 euros and he repays his debt, so his credit record is correct, and then he gets the 1 million euros credit and he flies away to somewhere in a remote place. So you cannot predict always by past behaviors how the different actors will behave in the future. And since a lot of moral hazard is involved, governments, unfortunately, but also corporations, may default under conditions which can be explained by various factors which could not exactly be determined when the rating agencies were producing their ratings. And this is an inherent problem in their operation. I'm not in favor of any conspiracy theories, and I do not believe in any models which predict that the credit rating agencies have the power to influence the markets, because we cannot prove that. Nevertheless, the fact remains that their role is very important in the economy, because they are, as a matter of fact, the barometer for the operation of governments when they issue bonds, and for companies when they issue stocks and bonds. And in that sense, it is more than obvious that any kind of self-regulation did not prove sufficient in order to allow for reliable data to be provided by these institutions. Having said that, I believe that the market shares of these institutions will remain high. There are new entrants in the market, but nevertheless, not to the extent that this oligopolistic structure has been changed, and it's not predicted to be changed. Nevertheless, market will prove whether some new players could enter into the field. Why not? Even though the higher regulatory requirements can be also be translated as an impediment to the entry of new players in the market to a large scale, obviously, because the cost of their operation will increase. Coming now to the different models that the credit rating agencies are using, to be honest, I do not have any reliable data. And it is not a regulation which will dictate them how to operate. The regulation is not violating the basic rule on which our treaties are based, free market economy with competition. And that means that the models that can be developed depend definitely on the institution. Nevertheless, there are some limitations imposed by the regulation with regard to the way these are structured, the data on which they have to rely, and so on. But the models themselves are developed by the agencies, and I think they should continue to do so, because in a market economy, we should rely on innovation, and new models could be developed, and models cannot be dictated by regulation. This is my personal view. You need regulation, but not on how the models are being created, potentially by calibrating the way of their shaping and the data that are included therein. Coming finally to the liability aspects, here you have the following. The second amendment to the regulation, that 2013, included new articles on the civil liability of credit rating agencies. But at that point, you have a hybrid situation according to which you have some European legislation dictating the rules according to which the liabilities are going to be shared, but nevertheless the rules remain national, because you do not have any harmonization of the liability rules. So in that sense, still have national legislation which is more or less dictating that. And when it comes to non-contractual liability, then I think we have resorted to the Rome II regulation to see whose country rules apply. So in order to identify the liability regime, you need to have a blend between the rules provided in the CRA regulation, Rome I, Rome II, and national legislations, which finally will dictate. With regard to liability actions, which was your direct question, I don't have any data. No, I don't know. I really don't have this accurate information on how many actions have been raised against rating agencies. What I know, and I know because it is clearly dictated by the regulation, is that the investors and the firms have claims on credit rating agencies themselves and the conditions described in Article 36, I think. No, it's 35 of the 35A, the regulation in front of me, of the regulation. So I have specific conditions under which this may be exercised, but it doesn't.
Okay, we thank you very much. We thank you for your time, and we hope to welcome you soon in Thessaloniki. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and apologies again. Thank you. Have a nice day and a very good continuation to your seminar today. And definitively congratulations for the initiative and for running such an ambitious program. And I'm glad that I'm on board on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Με αυτόν τον τρόπο λοιπόν τελειώσαμε από αυτό το session. So it is time to close the session and have a coffee. Thank you very much.